And without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie Curcio, and this will probably last about 90 minutes. She's got an awful lot to say. Every minute is worth it. So Stephanie Curcio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary. Welcome, everybody. I got a lot of old friends seem to be here that I haven't been able to see in a long, long time. We've all changed a lot, but hey, we're here, right? All right. I'd like to start off today with an interesting question. Because you can play an instrument, does that mean that you can teach it to others? In my humble opinion, the answer to that is no, not without some teacher training. Why? Well, let's start with a bit of a historical perspective. The harp is a very ancient instrument, as probably most of you know. The definitive information on harp is can be found in Harps and Harpists by Rosalind Wrench. There were early depictions of harps on the walls of tombs in ancient Egypt. There were all different kinds of harps, different sizes, different styles, and they were played in a lot of different ways, but life and culture was very different back there. For the most part, things were learned by what we call rote. And even today, there are people who say, well, rote learning is wonderful. We should all do that. There's one problem with that. When it was used, you always had the teacher or the person who knew more about it there with you, whether they were teaching you or whether you were, sitting together playing music after dinner. The person who could give you feedback, give you advice, help you along was always there. Life changed. We don't do that anymore. We take a lesson, we go home, we're on our own for a week. That is just fodder for all kinds of problems. And rote learning just doesn't fit very well, but it was the way people learned forever. Now, the harps they were using on, oh, and by the way, because of rote learning, there really was no notation. I mean, if you go far enough back, there wasn't the system of notation yet. So one of the hazards of rote learning is that you lose the music over time. A lot of music has gone extinct. We don't have a lot of examples of music from medieval times or from Celtic times. There was a period of time when Tina Turner informed me that Scottish harp music was disappearing, and they had a countrywide competition to get people to write down things from Scottish music that they already knew. This was an attempt to revive something that was just disappearing. Harps were very limited. I mean, they are all different size, but you had a certain number of strings and you could tune them to one key or one mode. And, that's fine. But people wanted more. And so over the years, and that's hundreds of years, they started searching for ways to add chromatics, flats, sharps. They tried all different kinds of things. I remember being surprised by this. They actually, one of the first forms of lever were a bent nail. This was nailed into the harp, and then this could bend so it was vertical or horizontal or vertical. And that would create a half step differential in the string. They had levers, they had, on some notes, on all notes. In the Wales and the other Celtic countries, they started working with double layers of strings and triple layers of strings. They did all sorts of things. The problem is there was never very much of a focus on how to learn these things, and it was still done by rote. Well, round about the 1700s, the first single action pedal harps came into being. And this changed a lot of stuff. As time went on, that turned into the early 1800s when they had double action pedal harps, which is what we have now. And the thing is that the lever harps or the non-pedal harps or simply began to disappear. On top of that, no matter what happened, it wasn't even until the early 1900s that any kind of harp culture came to America. I found that to be shocking when I started studying it. And I realized that I was unbelievably lucky because, yes, there were concert harpists who came in, gave concerts, played with symphonies, but they always went home and they had no particular interest in teaching. I was born in New York City. This became the center of the development of harp culture in this country. I was born 1938. That hurts. Okay. But this was a time when Carlos Salcedo, Marcel Grangeny had already emigrated to this country, and they were icons of the field. They were great harpists. They tried very hard to focus on teaching. Um, I studied, I began harp in high school. First of all, you have to know that I played the piano from age 5 all the way through my college degrees. And I had all kinds of theory and harmony and classes in music all the way through. So I was very well trained. In the European traditions, when the pedal harp was being developed, they did not believe that you could start anybody on the harp without at least 2 or 3 years of piano preceding. That has turned out to be a pile of hogwash. But they didn't know how to teach. And the truth is, I picked up harp when I got into high school. I went to the High School of Music and Art. They had a harp. It was a specialized high school for potential professional musicians. My first teacher was a Beverly Mann. She was a lovely lady. She played well. She was the first harpist for the first production of the Fantastics in New York. But I learned next to nothing from the classes. There was a girl there who studied with Carlos Salcedo. So my family and I interviewed with him. Well, there's no way we could afford him. Came from a working class family. We were very poor. But he sent us to Lucille Lawrence, and she was my teacher from there on. Only thing was, it was rather surprising starting lessons with Lucille Lawrence. Remember, I was still taking piano, and I was with very good teachers. There were all kinds of things in the world of piano. There were tutorial series, there were experienced teachers. There was nothing like that in the world of harp. Lucille and Carlos knew that I had a good background in music. So basically, what happened with me was my lessons were almost all technique. I was handed music. I was given Miss Lawrence's copy, told copy the markings from Mr. Salcedo. If he changes his mind, he'll let you know. You'll have to change all your markings, no matter whether you learned it or not, and you'll relearn the piece. And then, okay, you got the music, go learn it. Come to your lesson and we'll work on technique. It was very surprising because of my background. Um, it was very hard because the teaching did not consist of how do you learn this? And some of it is very complicated. The coordination of hands, the coordination what you're doing, somebody would have been nice if somebody told me how to do it. But the truth is, they didn't know how to tell me that. It was not at all unusual in those days. I heard it over and over again. People being told, you're never going to be able to do this. Give it up. Go find another instrument. It was crushing to the people who had that told to them. But in the long run, it was not their fault. Even though I had world famous, best of the best teachers, they still didn't know much about teaching. I survived, okay? The truth is, no harpists at that point, even in Europe, had a real good idea of how to teach. They figured after you got your 3 years of piano, then you started harp, And you would spend the first 3 years, 3 hours a day, playing nothing but exercises and etudes. I know this because I had a girl come to me at one of the private schools where I taught. She did not want to take lessons. Her parents forced it. She came into my studio, and you could feel the absolute hatred this girl had for playing the harp. It was not only palpable, but I felt kind of dangerous because she came so close to exploding at me. This kind of teaching and learning doesn't fit our society and our world anymore. But then what does? It became very clear to me as I began working more with this. There were no tutorial series for harp as there were in piano. I'm sure those of you who have taken piano lessons long ago remember John Thompson and the Alfred series and all the rest of these. They were, whether you agreed with this approach or that approach was neither here nor there. There were approaches. And they helped teachers to teach. We didn't have that. So I was determined I would write a tutorial series for harp, and I did. The Student Harpist, levels 1, 2, and 3. And Mary can show them to you. I also discovered that there was literally a tiny, tiny amount of music that you could provide for either students learning the harp or what I like to call hobby harpists, people who weren't going to be professionals, but they wanted to play, they wanted to enjoy something. There was no music out there. So I started writing it. Other people started along with me. Sylvia Woods began doing her work back not too long or too far away from when I did. And then many other people have come along since. But it was quite an amazing recognition as I grew. What I'm basically saying to you is that because you can play the harp, and God knows my teachers could play them better than anybody else, doesn't mean you can teach it. And they didn't teach very well. So let's move on from there. Think about something. We've all gone to school one way or another. School teachers do not go up and say, I want to be able to teach at your school, let me in. I like kiddies. They have to be trained. They get college degrees. They have to be certified. And that certification has to be maintained. So when the kiddies come home and have a day off because it's teacher training day, that's what their teachers are doing. They're renewing certification, they're keeping their training up. It's very, very important. And teaching the harp is no less demanding than teaching a child to read, or you can count, you can give them numbers. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can show them what that means. But then how do you add and subtract? There are skills to this, and there are skills to playing the harp, and there are skills to learning music on the harp. So let's start for a moment with matching the student to the harp. That is a lot more complicated than young teachers would think. There are lots of different size students. There are lots of different size harps. What you got to do is make a fit. And the first thing that is most important is good posture. Whoops, I don't want to knock the harp over. You have to sit straight. You have to keep your feet on the floor. You don't want to bend into the harp. You'll get a backache doing that. You don't want a harp, especially a pedal harp, very heavy on your shoulder. You'll get all kinds of aches there. Now, how do you find the right seat height for a student? What I do is I have them just gently put their arms up like this, straight, just relaxed. And if they're below center, I raise the seat of the height of the seat, so that when they're relaxed, they're around the center of the instrument. With a child, very often, if you raise the seat, that means their little feeties will go curled underneath, Actually, adults do that. Okay. Then you get a footstool for the child. With the adults who do it or the older students who do it, and they do it constantly, it is your job as the teacher to keep monitoring them. Uncurl your feet, please, flat on the floor. Does it drive you crazy? Absolutely, but it's your job. Do you feel like you're criticizing the poor child? Tough, it's your job. Okay. It's what they need to hear. Then, of course, you have to get into things like the object of this. You're after good balance. You're after freedom of movement. The last thing you want to do is have a harp too close to a student where they feel they have to hug it or it's going to stand up. You don't want it too far from the student, lest they bend over and try to accommodate. You have to make a fit. And if you're dealing with children, that seat has to be adjustable. The footstool can come or go, and the position of the harp has to be monitored and changed as the child grows. The body grows, but this is where they're used to sitting. So move them out and help them understand that. It's very important, and it's all part of being a good teacher. The music stand. Everybody wants to put the music stand way over there, okay? So now you're playing the harp here, and you're looking at the music, and you're playing a tennis game between the music stand and the harp. The other thing, too, is vision. When you're looking at the strings, you are looking at them sort of peripherally. Periphery means the outside side of the vision. Many people, I had a lady one time come to a workshop. I nearly died when I saw her play. She was sitting way low to the floor. She had her left leg way out, and she turned herself so she could face the harp straight on, so she could see the strings. So she came in for a lesson after this workshop, and she walked in the door, and I said, "Let me help you with your backaches." And she, "How did you know?" Because, and now it's because of vision. With students who wear glasses or adults, you're going to have a lot of trouble with this. I find that if I have my adults get what is called a mid-range pair of glasses, just for the harp or actually for a computer, that works very well. Because if you wear progressives, you only have a teeny area in the glass to see the harps. It's very hard to do. Hands, arms, shoulders. This is all called technique. And no, it is not a dirty word. A lot of young teachers think it is. A lot of people who are self-taught think it is. Technique has a very, very simple goal. You want to achieve a comfortable position at the harp. You want to develop safe and solid body and hand usage. That's what it's after. And you want to develop a good tone. Hence, there are certain things that are common to all techniques, and there are lots of different techniques. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you have to teach Salzedo technique or European technique or this technique. Most of those won't work on a lever harp anyway. But what I am going to say to you is your hands need to be relaxed. You can't play the strings and claw. That stiffness will just kill you. It'll make a terrible sound, and it will not allow you facility at the instrument. So you've got to help the kids to close those hands. What do you do with the thumbs? They're a different technique than the other fingers. Well, I was brought up with a high thumb technique, okay? I believe in folding it down. The original Salzedo technique went like that, and it made for terrible thumb sound. Folding the thumbs down is very hard, but it can be learned. Now, if you use a more rolling technique like a European, then you roll with that, and that helps the thumb sound a little bit. Whatever you do, you've got to keep the hands closing properly so they are relaxed. You've got to somehow deal with what do you do with your hands when you raise from the strings? And here we get into controversy. The most natural thing for anybody to do is I'm playing, I let go, I'm going to drop my hands. That's gravity. It used to be that way all the time, especially in the beginning of pedal harp in Europe. The story, and this is a true story, and this is the etiology, the source of the Salzedo raise. Salzedo was playing for the premiere of the Firebird Suite in Paris, and Nijinsky, the famous Russian dancer, was performing. Nijinsky came to him backstage and saw him practicing, and he was using European technique, which is what he was brought up on, which is why he falls into it as you watch him. He doesn't always do his technique. But when he would play, he would drop his hands, okay? Nijinsky said to him, "You play the most beautiful instrument on earth. Why don't you allow your hands to rise and express the music? Fill the spaces when there is no sound. And just, that is what the raise is about, besides the relaxation and the tone." But over time, you would please excuse me, it has become bastardized. People criticized the Salzedo raise, so the Salzedo people dug in their heels and did more of it. I was beyond appalled when I came to New Hampshire and at one time went down to Boston University with my students to share, various students playing. My own teacher, Lucille Lawrence, her students from BU were up there on that stage. I kid you not, playing like this the entire time. I couldn't watch them. It looked like some sort of a gymnastic exercise they were doing. And it was so distracting. But she was obsessively devoted to Salzedo. And the more you said that was wrong about or anything, the more you disagreed with, the harder she would dig her heels in. And that became true of a lot of people um, who were early followers of Salzedo. Anyway, the idea of technique is safe, comfortable, relaxed, and there are different ways of going about doing it. But your job as a teacher, whether you like it or not, whether it drives you insane, whether the students are not particularly happy with you, is to monitor those students. Make sure that they're doing the right things. I'll give you another interesting experience. I had a young girl one time, very petite, massively talented. She was playing a smaller pedal harp. Her mommy wanted her to have a full concert grand. I said, "You can't do that. It is too big an instrument. It will weigh her down. It will hurt her development. She's young. She's still developing." In fact, I mentioned this to my physical therapist this morning. I just got out of knee surgery. And he said, "Oh, yeah, you destroyed her back doing that." And I said, "No, I did not want this child to have a concert grand harp." A few weeks later, I get a call from Lyon and Healy asking, "Did you approve of this?" And I said, "No." So I called the family, read them the riot act, and Lyon and Healy actually refused to sell them a harp at that point in time. That's integrity. Very recently, this young lady's mother gave me a call and told me that she had finished her degrees at Juilliard and her master's degrees at, I can't remember where, somewhere in Pennsylvania. And she was playing professionally. She was healthy. She had no arm and back problems. And the mother thanked me. I thought that was incredibly big of her. But these are the things we have to do as teachers. How did I even know that? Because I have training. Now, Mary, I don't know if you want me to stop for a minute and take questions now, or should I finish the presentation? Mary, what would you like me to do?
What are you comfortable with? Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, shall I continue?
Continue then, sure.
All right. Let's turn our attention now to learning to read notes, something that in the past was believed to be unacceptable. It's very possible on the harp. We all know this now. We've been teaching for a long time, since those early 1900s. I am a very firm believer in concept learning. So one of the things I do is I have to create a whole picture for a student. I am also a firm believer in reading both treble and bass clef notes at the same time. There are many, for instance, in the older piano tutorials, there were some that went for treble clef only at first, then added bass. What you ended up with were people who really were afraid of bass clef reading, and they just not were comfortable with it. Okay. There have been all kinds of people who said, "Oh, there's got to be a better way than starting with middle C," but that's pretty much gone by the wayside. So I use the middle C approach. Now, to begin with, wait a minute, hang on just 1 second. I think I may have skipped something. Yes, I did skip something. Please let me go back for a minute, okay? Please bear with me. Before we get into specifics of reading, this is very, very important, okay? Teachers have got to have some knowledge of basic psychology. Psychology is the study of human behavior. I have a master's degree in it. I'm very fortunate that way. My husband is a doctor of psychology. When we came to New Hampshire, he was hired by the education department at the university to teach psychology to young teachers. This is common to all the programs in teaching. Let me explain why. First thing you've got to do is understand concept formation. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. For children, this is up, this is down. No problem, right? For sound, sound goes up like this, sound goes down like that. So far, no problem. You're dealing with sound, you're dealing with, but on the harp, up goes this way, down goes that way. That is not easy for a relatively young child. It's a difficult concept, and you have to be patient enough and understanding enough to know that maybe they're not quite getting that, and you have to work with it. Another problem would be perception. Perception is how you see your world. Now, you give a child, for instance, you're beginning to work on notes, okay? And you say, let me give you an example here. Well, I didn't write one out. A quarter note has a filled in head and it has a stem, okay? And you say to the child, the stem can go up, the stem can go down. Well, you can say it till you're green, but when you show it to them on a piece of music, if they see a quarter note on the middle line of the treble staff and the stem goes up, and then they see a quarter note on the middle line of the treble staff and the stem goes down, they very often do not perceive that as being the same, because you're talking about a concept they haven't quite gotten, and their perception is not accepting the differentials between the staffs and between the stems. This is not at all easy. One of the things here that I do have, for instance, these are eighth notes. I tell kids all the time, this is an eighth note, okay? It takes 2 eighth notes to equal a quarter. Never mind that. These are also eighth notes. They're holding hands. That's one of the things they tell them in school, music programs. Doesn't make any difference. It takes a bloody long time for them to perceive that these are eighth notes and so are those. It does not come particularly easy to a child's perception. Then you say, all right, you have to understand the development of a child and maturation. There are things that you cannot expect of an 8-year-old that you could expect of a 10-year-old. But you have to know a little bit about child development for this. That's your job as a teacher. We don't all learn the same way, and that's another condition. People have different learning styles. There are people who are visual, they see it, they can copy it. There are people who are auditory. You play it for them, they'll copy what you do. There are people who are kinetic, they have to feel it. But the point is, even though a learner, any student, adult, child, whatever, has a penchant in a certain direction, you don't want to work only with that. You want them to learn to use all the various facets of learning. And that's your job as a teacher. Coordination. We have one asset on the harp. When we play hands together, both of our hands are in the same position. 1, 2, 3, 4, unlike the piano. Okay, that's reversed. But that's fine until you start playing one thing with one hand and something with the other. Or you play something connected with this hand and lift this one. That's not easy. And it depends on the age of the child and the development of their maturation. It's not maturity of age, it's maturation of learning abilities. These things are very complicated, and they require that a teacher understand what she or he are doing with the child. Now, are there any questions? I think so. I think I see someone.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Students who come to me who have had previous learning experience, what I call Suzuki-like experience,
Oh.
and I tell them I can help you to read, but I find that they are so accustomed to playing at a higher level than they're able to read, that they lack the patience to go back to easier pieces to learn the reading.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for, it's gotten to where I say, if you've learned Suzuki,
That is
go away.
The answer to that depends on how much patience you have and how much you can get them to trust you and be willing to work with you. It's very difficult because, you know, it's funny, when I was being trained and in high school, I was classically trained. I used to just worship the guys and the kids who could do improvisation and play jazz and whatever. And I remember going to my teachers and saying, "God, I really love that. I want to do that." "Don't you dare. It will destroy you as a classical harpist." And I understand why, because when you've done it one way, it's very hard to do it another way. I have never been fond of the Suzuki approach on anything other than young children and a stringed instrument like a violin, because they have to find the pitch. And Suzuki approach does help them find the pitches. But it creates, I've had some brilliant young violinists come in. They could play as long as somebody had played it for them, but they couldn't do it for themselves. And I am violently opposed to that kind of approach, but you'd have to see. Any other questions? Okay, then let's go to reading.
I have a question, if I may.
Go ahead.
I feel strong patience for the student. What do you say to parents who don't understand, or at-home facilitators, when you say up is this way and down is that way, and it's taking the child longer than the parent would like?
Well, that is really, really an important question. Parents are part of your teaching. You are not only teaching a child, you are teaching the parents. And you have got to establish the fact that you know what you're doing and that you are helping them to understand something in child development. I always try to have an ongoing relationship with my parents as much as my kids. Some of them can be bears. Some of them are very cooperative. Some of them think that if you try to hold back a little bit and get some technique or get some learning in, you're holding their little darlings back. Other ones want you to fly forward no matter what. It's a very difficult thing. And again, a teacher really has to be conversant with psychology, not only with the kids, but with the parents. Sometimes the parents are worse than the kids are. Anything else? Shall we go forward?
Question.
Yeah. See,
Question.
I can't see. Is there
Oh,
another,
well, I don't have my camera turned on.
well, it doesn't make any difference. Is there another question?
Can you hear me okay?
I can
Yeah,
hear you.
we
fine.
can hear you. Okay, sure.
Yes.
I can't see you, but I mean, I could if I.
Okay.
scrolled.
I'm what's your policy on parents attending lessons?
Well, that really depends. Okay. For the most part, I have no problems with that at all. However, it depends a lot on the relationship that you see. There are parents who absolutely insist on being there. Okay, I don't mind that. You know, I've been on stage all my life, it doesn't bother me. But if they interfere, then I have to monitor that. I have to help them understand. For instance, one of my most brilliant students ever started at age 5. I'm going to say maybe this happened when she was something like 6. She came from a family of a lot of kids, a lot of music, and mommy was really overbearing. But I had asked this little youngster a question, and she simply sat still and didn't answer. Now, I knew she could answer the question, but she also knew that if she shut her mouth long enough, she wouldn't have to answer the question. Mommy would do it, and mommy did. Oh, she said, this is the answer. And I told her mother, you cannot do that. She said, well, I have too many children. I don't have the time to wait her out. And I said, then she knows that, okay? And she's playing you like a well-tuned violin, okay? I mean, these are the things that happen.
Yep.
You've got to judge each situation the way they go, you know? And I don't think I can do a one answer for all people. Okay,
Right.
moving on.
Thank you.
You're
I
very
do
welcome.
have a question.
All right. Okay.
And I'm wondering if you remember any of the ways that you have undone the damage.
Well, the first thing that comes to me is I have been blessed with the ability to deal with very, very, very gifted kids. It comes very naturally to me. And what happens with gifted kids is very often they'll come to you from other teachers who become so so enamored with the gift of this child that they start moving so fast and so fast and so fast. And eventually, when you do that with a gifted student, they're going to hit a wall because they are not getting all the stuff they need along the way. When I got a kid like this, I explained to the child and to the parents that I need to fill in all the holes. I joke around with the kid. your brain right now is like a block of Swiss cheese. I want to get it to be solid like cheddar. Okay. I want to fill those holes, but you got to work with me. We got to go back maybe to ground zero and fill in all the things you don't know. Now, again, it takes a lot of experience to do this, but it also takes, you've got to build that relationship with the student to have them trust you. When you get all this filled in, then you can fly forward. And it can be done. I have done it. It isn't easy. But I will not go forward with a student that is lacking all sorts of stuff. I just won't. And I'll explain it to the parents. Either we do this, because my goal in teaching, if I were to say one thing, was I want to develop an independent harpist, someone who can learn by themselves, for themselves down the road. They can read, they can interpret, they can take modern music that was just done by a composer and say, okay, I'll work with you on this. But to have that independence, you've got to have all kinds of knowledge. You've got to really know your music. And playing, as you said, with all kinds of holes doesn't work. Okay? So I think it's time to go on. So let's go back to reading. I have two pieces of material that I use. With young children, less than 9, for instance, I usually start with my primer set. Mary can show you what that is. The primer is a pre-reader. What happens is I build concepts and I use a lot of interesting situations, techniques of learning, so that it enables the child to play actual pieces very early on. Now, before I go any further, it is designed for young students, but I have had many teachers across the country tell me that they actually are very successful using it with adults also. I start, no matter whether it's a primer or whether it's student harpist, no matter whether you're an adult or a child, if you haven't learned to read music, we start with the foundation stone, which is very simple. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are the 7-letter names in music. But then the first thing I ask you to do is say them backwards. G, F, E, D, C, B, A. Usually they stumble a little bit. Why do I have to do it backwards? Because music going forward is going upward is the alphabet going forward. Music going downward is the alphabet going backwards. Then I introduce the octave. So we now know that 7-letter series repeats itself. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. The 8th note is the same letter name. And we drill that from note to note, C to C, E to E, upward and downward. That shows them the foundation of the process of reading music. And I make them stay with, naming things for a while until they really absorb that, okay? Next, we have to talk about the ranges. Now, when I'm working with the primer starts off by a line which I will say is high C and middle C. And I show them, oh, here it is. And I show them high C and middle C. And then I show them the notes only as names with a direction, E, D, C, E, D, C, G, F, E, and you know what that's going to be, right? That helps them understand the notes moving in a direction, high or low, and within a certain range. Then I can change that and it will become the range of middle C to low C, okay? The next thing I start doing is using stems. Stems will show you which hand to play. Now, this, for instance, is when I start combining it with a box, which makes it preparation for measures. And then I'll have a certain number of beats. I introduce beats. And this, for instance, is a beat. So it goes E, D, C, beat. So that if you're not playing, you're saying beat for an extra note. What I'm doing is I'm introducing them to concepts very easily. I use stems on notes in both the primer and in the student harpist. And I explain to the students for now. That's my favorite early word for students, is for now. Why? Because things change. For now, we're going to play all the notes with stems up with your right hand. I might put a red mark on the right hand, and I might make the stems red. We're going to play the left hand, blue stems, blue mark on your hand. And they begin to sort their hands out. Will we always do this? No, but for now, that's what we do. However, when the kids start getting irritated at the stems, I explain to them that this is going to go away. Eventually, the stems won't matter for a while, but it'll come back when you get more advanced. I pull out some of my music with the arpeggio going up and down and the stems telling you which one to play. And then they understand. Kids are very flexible if you give them a reason to be flexible and if you can get them to trust you. It's not particularly easy, but you can do it. So now we've introduced ranges, stems, beats, and essentially, if you're using the primer, you have to go through all two of them because you have to make sure there are two books in the series. So they're not big, but you've got to make sure that they have all those concepts well in mind. And then you shift them right into the student harpist. The beginning of student harpist is very much the same, but it's a good thing because they see what they learned in something they understood more easily now in real musical notation. When I start to work with real music and notation, I start out with a very, very interesting concept. It's called middle C. Think about it. Middle C resides exactly dead center between the treble and the bass clef. If you move up one note from middle C, you go to D, which is hanging off the treble clef. If you go down one note from middle C, you got B, which is sitting on the bass clef. Middle C is written, it's pushed up a little higher when it's played in the treble, and it's pushed down a little bit when it's playing the bass. So the first exercises you get in reading are, if it's written in the treble clef, play it with your right hand. If it's written in the bass clef, play it with your left. But it's the same note. And that in perception and concept formation is incredibly important because you're pulling together the relationship of C, D, E, F or C, B, A, G. And it's all written out in the Student Harpist series. So what happens then is you start working with both stabs, moving little by little, very gradually, from one middle C upward or middle C downward. The biggest problem with teaching reading is that, or with teaching anything at early levels, is moving too far, too fast, and presenting to the student many concepts at one time. That's the most important part of tutorial series. If you look through the student harpist sight reader, just the student harpist, you will see that I build things very gradually. Very important. The student has got to see that. They've got to see the development. As you are working with the students, learning to read, it's slow, okay? It's a great time to also focus on their technique. not only can you play the notes, play the notes, play the notes, play the notes, but how do you play the notes? And it takes patience, and it ain't fun, but it's your job. You're the teacher. Now we get to rhythm concepts. Now, rhythm is, again, I believe in a holistic approach to things. Rhythm is nothing but a simple arithmetic. I have a thing called a rhythm cue card that Mary can show you. It is a very carefully designed chart, which will show you the relationships of rhythm, but you're all teachers, so you can follow me. When you are teaching a child that a quarter note is a beat, a half note is 2 beats, if they're old enough, the concept quarter, half, whole doesn't always line up with what you're saying to them, because somewhere in their minds, whole, half, quarter, whatever, it isn't lining up with what you're saying. It's a quarter note. Why does it get 1 beat? Okay, our rhythm system is built on what is called a geometric progression in math. The entire system is 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. Everything is based on that. If you use computer programs for music, they are very mathematical, and this is all set into them. When you want to break with that, you have to get the computer to do something instead of something. I'll get there in a minute. When our musical system was developed, a whole note represented 1 beat. A half note represented a half of the whole note. So it took 2 half notes to equal a whole. A quarter note, symbol 4, was a whole note divided in 4 equal parts. Took 4 parts to equal a whole. Now, that is how it started. But over time, because you can assign a beat to any note you want to, people started assigning 1 beat to the quarter note. That way, easily, you could have a half note, which was worth 2 quarter notes, or a whole note, which is worth 4 quarter notes. But you can see the name of the note doesn't fit with the beat you put on it. So I think the student, if they're old enough, has to understand the process. And that cue card shows it. Now, the relationship of the progressive numbers, the geometric progression numbers, is always the same. If I assign 1 beat to an 8th note, which we can do 6/8 time, okay? 6/8 notes equals a measure of music. Now, that's called a completely different thing, because I'm not going to get into that here, but 6/8 is just the first step. It's because your intended beat is a dotted quarter, but there's no number in the system that will give you a dotted quarter. So we teach it as 6/8, and then we convert it to 2 dotted quarter time. But there's no number in the system. The next thing that happens then is, okay, we can multiply, we can divide within the normal system. But what if I want to take 1 beat and divide it in 3 equal parts? Now I don't have a note value for that. How do I do it? Well, let's use a computer for a minute. If I want to take a quarter note and divide it in 3 parts instead of 2, what I'm going to say is put 3 in the place of 2, and then it will make the exception, but they'll look like 8th notes. And I explain this to the students. It's bracketed. Of course, very often they don't bother bracketing, but it should be bracketed. This is 3 in the place of 2. That makes a triplet. This is tough concept formation. They can get it. Let's say you want to divide a quarter note into 5 equal parts. You can have 16ths, but 5, 6, or 7 equal parts don't exist. You have 16ths, which are 4 for 1, and you have 32nds, which are 8 for 1. What do you do in the middle? You ask the computer, put 6 in the place of 4. Put 5 in the place of 4. Put 7 in the place of 4. They're still going to look like 16th notes, but they're bracketed. These are all exceptions to our rhythm system because the system was not designed to accommodate that. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and don't hold me to this one, I think this was developed by monks a long time ago. And this was probably in the vicinity of the time when they did Gregorian chant, and even earlier. And it was, dividing something in 3 parts was not part of their concept formation. Anyway, the other exception that we use in rhythm is the dot, and that's a killer. So here's how I do a dot. I explain to the student, of course, that a dot adds to a note 1/2 the value of the note. Here's a quarter note. Let's say that the box is 1 beat and the next box is 1 beat. The second box I have divided with a dotted line to 2 eighth notes. When you add a dot to a note, what you're doing is you're tying the quarter note into the first half of the beat. So it's 1, 2, and I use a whisper to help them understand when they count 2, they're not playing anything on it because you have tied them. Okay? That's the way I help them understand. And then I do it with different note values. A half note is, a dot is 1/4, adds 1/4 note. Rhythm is very complicated for most people, but it can be, if it's understood holistically, I think it can be better understood by all people. Do we have any questions now? No questions? My goodness. Okay. Either I'm a grand failure or I'm doing well. All right. If nobody has any questions, then I will take a shot at the next 2 issues. Ensemble playing and performance jitters. I was giving a workshop like this in a grand auditorium in Boston at one of the national workshops for teachers some years ago. There were 5 or 6 kids in the audience just listening to me. And we were talking about ensemble preparation. And I said to them, the teachers, the most important thing you can do to develop ensemble preparation is to have students learn to stay with a beat that is outside of themselves, a metronome. I said, kids don't like metronomes. Why don't kids like metronomes? All 6 hands went up, okay? It won't stay with me. True, that's the idea. It is not supposed to stay with you. You're supposed to stay with it. Kids hate metronomes, most of them. In fact, to be honest with you, I did a concert one time with a violinist who had been around a long while. She was no kid. And she just had terrible timing. And I said, well, let's play with the metronome. No, I don't do that. I said, well, then, let me put it gently to you. I'm not playing with you, okay? Either we have to stay together, or we're not playing, okay? Now, it turns out her family were big donors to the school that I was teaching at. And the chairperson said to me, you have to play with her. That was fun. But we got it done. Anyway, the point of the matter is, ensemble playing is all about, first and foremost, the beat. There can be a conductor, there can be a lead player. It is much easier to play with a conductor than it is to play on your own, because that there's a give and take to playing on your own. You know, one person takes the lead for this part, person takes the lead for another part. But if there's a conductor, and I teach my kids this all the time, first issue you have to deal with is the downbeat. Get used to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2. They've got to get used to that. They've got to get used to staying with the metronome. Now, people have tremendous problems with the metronome. First thing I do is have them play 1 note per beat. 1 note per beat. That's hard enough for some people. But then, the most important single thing you have got to do for playing in any kind of ensemble or orchestra is learn to divide the beat equally. So your conductor is going to go 1, 2, 3. If you're playing 8th notes, you got to play 2 for 1. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now I did that evenly. Most students will go 1 and, 2 and, 3 and. And that is very difficult. You've got to get the students used to the idea of executing 2 notes for 1 beat, 4 notes for 1 beat, whatever is required. I had a girl at one of my schools, 2 sisters, and I had drilled them. I like to drill the students this way. Put your metronome on. Okay. Can you hear this? Put your metronome on and go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. Evenly. Get used to it. Do it at different tempi. Do it faster. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. They hated it. Okay? But I made them do it. Okay? One of the girls went into orchestra to play a part, and then she came back and I said to her, how did it go? She said it went very well. But she said, we also sight read a new piece. And she said, I hate to tell you this, but I was the only one who could divide the beat evenly. And she told me, I can't tell you how much I hated you when you made me do that. But that's what if you're a parent, you're going to take the guff from your kids. If you're a teacher, you're going to take the guff from the students until someday they see that maybe you had a reason for what you were doing. Equal subdivision is absolutely essential, and that you will see also on the rhythm cue card. It's an incredibly important compilation of studies. Questions on rhythm? No? No
On the
questions?
harp. Well, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I just want to be sure because I've been trying for 100 years to make the metronome my friend. So do you mean that when you say divide the beat, can you explain what you mean by divide the beat? Because
All
there's
right.
one, what's the difference between that and 1 and 2 and
That's just,
1, 2, 3?
that's just a verbalization of the concept. You can say it whichever way you want to. 1 and here's the beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and. But what you are doing is if you're playing eighth notes, I'll do this here for a minute. Let's say I have my left hand is playing C's. Okay? I'm going together, together. Now I'm going to go twofer. I like to call them twofers. You can call it one and. But the object is that the first of the two, it's with the left hand. The next one goes in between the beat and the next beat. And the trick is to make it even. This, can you hear that that's not even?
Yes.
That's what students will do. And one of the things when you're even on an advanced level with students, they'll do running lines and they don't sound even because they end up going da 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 da. Okay, but they have to be exactly even, and that is difficult. If you ever played, for instance, in an orchestra as, let's say, a violinist, they spend innumerable hours drilling together so that all the violinists can play evenly divided, say, eighth notes or evenly divided 16th notes for one beat. I had a student one time. I was working at Phillips Andover Academy, and it was very resonant. I was working on getting her to subdivide a beat evenly, and one of the other teachers heard me. He played with the Boston Symphony, and he knocked on the door, and he said to the student right in front of me, "You listen to her. This is not easy, and you have to learn it." Because he had to do it as a violinist. Harpists don't generally have somebody else to play with, but I do a great deal of ensemble training. I have people play together. Most of the time I conduct until they get experienced enough. Okay, last subject.
Thank you.
Are we going to do the last subject?
Susan, did you have a question?
Oh,
I'll try to make it quick.
That's-
So on any other instrument, if you're holding a note longer than a beat, you're doing something. You're holding a piano key down until those beats go
Yeah.
by, or you're blowing. On a harp, you're just plucking and letting it go. And
Yeah.
that seems to be where the accuracy really falls apart.
You are absolutely correct. And the point is, essentially, when you teach students that a rest is a sign of silence, and their sound is ringing through it, that's just as bad, okay? It is something you have to explain. This is one of the things I try to get students all to understand, especially as they get more advanced. There are exceptions to everything. There are ifs, ands, and buts, but it's no different than the English language. We got plenty of that in the English language. What you've got to do is have them relate to the beat itself or the length of the note value, as opposed to whether it says a rest or whether it says a whole note. And it is not easy, but you are absolutely right. The thing is, I think that for me, I find my best results come from sharing that problem with the student and helping them find a way to solve it. Anything else? Okay, yes, I think I see somebody. Is
Yeah,
it
Linda
Linda?
Paul, yes.
Oh, hey,
So in orchestral music, I was taught that if there is a rest to dampen the string.
oh,
It depends on the piece, obviously,
yes,
but
yes,
when I compose things, when I write things, I try to be very clear
yes,
about when it is to be dampened and when it is to be LV, let vibrate.
right.
So what's your take on that, and how should we approach that?
Well, I mean, it's basically the same question that I just answered here. It is the musical notation system that we use is not designed for harp. And it doesn't do a lot of things. It doesn't do handing. It's very complicated. And for instance, when you transcribe something from another instrument, when a flautist would hold something and then stop for a rest, we don't necessarily do that. I had a very intense conversation with a French harpist who said the same thing that you did. Why don't you Americans, she said to me, observe the rests? Well, because sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth. It's a judgment call when you're playing at that level. With orchestral music, my rule of thumb is to listen to what is happening around me. If the harmony is changing or something is, then I'll muff. If the harmony is maintaining itself, then I won't bother about it. But I will make a fit to what I hear in orchestra. And and then you have to share that again with students who are at that level. It's a wonderful question. We have tons of these problems in harp, just tons of them. Next. No other questions? Okay, last subject, performance jitters. The first thing I do with my students from the very beginning, I tell them and I tell their parents, we have 2 recitals a year, winter and spring. The kids must play. This is required. It is not optional. Okay? The reason is because performing something has to be learned. There are very few people who are natural performers. You have to learn, you have to develop skills. First skill is to be able to keep going no matter what. Okay, I made a mistake, let it go. You can't focus on what you've already done because there's not a bloody thing you can do about it. But you have to try to do your very best, no question. But you also have to learn to accept we're human and we make mistakes. One of the differences between going to a live concert versus listening to the recorded music that's around us every day is that people in live concerts make mistakes. I was listening to a concert. Oh Lord, the one thing I can't do at my age is remember names. Body, okay, Chris Body, who's one of my favorite trumpet players. He was doing a concert at Carnegie Hall, and I was listening to this recording, and he was playing with 2 other very big name musicians. As they started a piece of music, it didn't go very well, and they stopped. And they said, that wasn't really a good start. Let's do that again. And he did it again. And the second time, it didn't go too well either. And he explained to the audience, this happens when you're playing live. Third time, it was perfect. They went to the end, they brought the house down. There was one of the great pianists in the past, Vladimir Horowitz, was absolutely famous for having gone onto the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York and starting a concerto. It was recorded, believe it or not, a long time ago as it may be. He was not happy with the beginning of his playing, and he stopped the orchestra and said, I'd like to do that again. I've used that example for students ad infinitum, because what they have to understand is you try for perfection, you do your best, and if you stumble, you stumble. Okay, you'll do better the next time. You want to be sloppy? Do you want to go, yeah, I can do it? There was a harpist named Dwayne Fulton, who's gone now. He was a jazz harpist, and he did a performance somewhere in Maine, I guess, for a big workshop. That man made more mistakes than I've ever heard a professional make in my life. And I knew him. He was a very good-natured guy. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, you make getting past an era, an art form. Put his arm around me, said, right, darling, that's the way you do it. Okay. That was the kind of person he was. Now, That guy really overdid it. Okay. But these are the kinds of things I try to get my students to understand. I I support them. I have them keep learning. I have them learn from each other. They talk about each other's performances, not to be critical, but to say, what could we have done? What could I suggest that the student do that would have made it better? And they gradually increase. On the other side of that, I've done a lot of preparation for big competitions and things like that. What I do with the students that way is I say to them, all right, first of all, you have a choice. Do you want to do this or not? I don't force my students to compete. But if they want to, I will say to them, you have to meet certain goals at each level. And as your performances get, well, for instance, I give you the example. I had one girl who applied for and won the Young Professional Division of American Harp Society back when she was 15, I believe. She was competing against conservatory students, young professionals, and she was brilliant and she won. But in the process of training her, she would do concerts. And each concert, I would make the screws a little tighter, make her more nervous. But the concert before the end, a friend of mine came up from Juilliard, who's a harpist, and I said to Annabelle, um, Emily is in the audience from Juilliard to listen to you, and she'll give you a critique at the end. One of my other students heard this and said, how can you do that to her? I said, she knows what I'm doing. She knows I am making it as nerve-wracking as possible so she'll be okay when she goes to competition. And she was okay. And she made it through the critique. But these are stages that you have to do. Nothing can be accomplished if they don't have to perform when they are beginners and learn the ropes. It's not easy. And it's very dependent on how much self-confidence the child has or the person has. Now, with adults, that's another whole story. I never combined my adult students with my young people for recitals. I'll have a soiree in the evening. We'll have a little get together, just adults, and they play for each other. That's fine. They never want to play with the kids because they always feel the kids will play circles around them. Okay, and usually they do. But it's psychology. It's human behavior. It's how we learn. It's how we develop self-confidence. Questions? Anybody? Well,
I will. I will.
I'll be
Go,
next.
Okay, so
go.
every person I've ever played harp with has described the shaking hands when they are performing, when they go to perform.
Right.
And the older the person, it seems like it's years before this ever gets under control. And all I can ever think is that it's just a matter of experience and getting used to it.
It is, there's no question that experience, but if they have a lot of experience and it's still happening, then it's a physiological reaction to the way they feel. Um, I know that you could possibly talk to a doctor about that. There are some things that they can do to help with that kind of thing. I have not run into the shaking hands very often. I really haven't. Um, I run into the sweaty hands, and you keep something attached to you so you can wipe your hands on them. Um, but I think that what you're describing is possibly something you might want to talk to a doctor about. They might have a solution for that. I don't have a solution for that. Experience, um, doing it over and over again. I also try to explain to my students that every time I get up on the stage, it's a different experience. There are times I'll get up to play a concert and I'm as cool as a cucumber. And as soon as I start playing, I go, and I have to keep it all under control. There are other times I'll be a nervous wreck before I start, and I'll sit at the harp and it all comes together. One of the things I do work on greatly with my students is called focus. I use a little exercise with them. I tell them to close their eyes. You guys can do this for a minute if you want to. Close your eyes and imagine that you're at the beginning of a very long, dark tunnel, but there's light at the end. Now you're walking down that tunnel and you're focused on the light and you're trying to get there. You're doing everything you can to get there. You're getting closer to it, and then you eventually get there. Open your eyes. Did you hear me doing anything other than talk to you? Did any of you hear me do anything other than talk to you? I clapped, I tapped, and I did something else at the end. If you didn't hear me, you were focused. And I do little exercises like that with the students. I did it with a young Asian student one time who was a very fine pianist, and she was giving a concert. She was very serious and she focused, and oh my God, she played better than I'd ever heard her play. When she got to the end of the piece, the audience just broke out in applause and she jumped. She had focused so hard, she had almost put herself in a trance. But we're all different, and we just have to deal with our differences. Any other
Stephanie,
questions? Yes.
Linda Paul.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was a vocal and harp major at the university, and my vocal coach, who was a very old grand dame, told me, I said something about I get butterflies, and this is the line she gave me, and I've used this with my students, and a focus exercise, kind of like what you do. And she said, of course, dear, you have butterflies. We just learned how to make them fly in formation.
Absolutely. And that's very, very important. We have a core, an energy core. And it is very important that we have that. It is not a bad thing that we get nervous, just have to learn how to control it.
Well, and we have to have that.
Yeah.
We have
Yes.
to have that kind of.
That's right. You're right. And that energy gives the music life. So
Yes.
before we finish today, I just want to promote my new book. You can read all about my life in the history of harp, and also a lot about different things that I have learned, notation, copyright, music publishing, all the things that I have done in my very extensive life in the harp. So it's available from Melody, or it's available from me at stephaniecurciopublications.com. I think I'm at the end of the time because I have a clock in front of me. Mary,
Yes.
thank you so, so much for doing
Oh,
this.
thank you. And I wanted to, if I'm sharing my screen, we do have a sale. And I think I'm pulling it up now. I hope that here it is. Okay, I don't know if you can all see this,
I see it. Mhm.
but if you order from Stephanie's website, you will get free shipping. And you can see that coupon code there.
Yeah.
SCPFS, Stephanie Curcio Publications, free
And
shipping.
that will only be good till, what is it, August 15th? As you said down the bottom there.
Okay, and then 15% off on our website too, with your coupon code is Curcio.
Okay. Thank you very
Okay.
much, everybody. I hope that I've given you something worthwhile.
Thank you so much. This has been, we were riveted with, we were riveted with interest in
Either
what you
that or I
had
put you to
say.
sleep.
No, not at all, not at all. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and end the meeting and send a follow-up later on. Thank you,
very,
Stephanie,
very
so
much.
much.
Goodbye,
All right.
everybody. Thank you for
Bye,
coming.
everybody. I want to make sure that I save the chat. Oh, no, there was, no, I'm not going to worry about the chat.
Okay,
Thank you, everybody.
I'm going to leave meeting now.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and leave the meeting too. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.